Is going on, people? Welcome to Peter on Pole. We are here to discuss Drive to Survive Season 6, Episode 3, Under Pressure. Why? This is about Zak Brown, McLaren, the story of McLaren. I tell you what, as a McLaren fan, as you can see, honestly, this is an episode that took me through all the emotions. So let's get into the review of this episode right this second, okay? It kicks things off at the McLaren HQ, where we get to see Paul Walsh, who's like a senior, very, very senior figurehead in McLaren, alongside Zak Brown. And, talking to Zak Brown, talking about, look, we need to really show up. The car that we have turned up with, especially in the last year, we've gone backwards. And the team needs to really, really show up this year. They got rid of Daniel Ricciardo the last season. And they also got rid of a few personnel as well, including James Key, who was kind of the technical director, who was very much part of making of this car. And so on one hand, they got rid of personnel, maybe because the personnel weren't delivering the results. But Paul Walsh is no mug. He sees through quite a lot of it and says, you know what, it's one thing to change the personnel, but what about the car itself? What is exactly up with the car? The media story was all about the car, right? So prove it to me. Like, prove that it is just about the car, that it was the driver, not the car itself. We get like a sort of, the episode kind of gives a bit of history about McLaren in terms of, when I say history, they pan the camera across like helmets of previous drivers, the Alonsos of this world, the Häkkinens of this world, people, Hamilton's helmets, people that have won championships. I know that Alonso didn't win a championship, but he came in as a world champion to McLaren. And, there's people that have been there who are solidified Formula One drivers. McLaren is a big team in Formula One, and they haven't been acting like it for the last several years. It's been a long time since McLaren were really anywhere near the top. And they were nowhere near the top at the start of this episode. So they were giving like a whole flashback and kind of going through what happened at the end of last season, getting rid of Daniel Ricciardo because they thought maybe Ricciardo wasn't the man. But at the same time, Paul Walsh is like, okay, the personnel's changed. What are you telling me, Zak? And it's interesting to see Zak Brown in this light, because Zak, when I look at Zak Brown, I think of somebody who is the figurehead. He's the main man. He's the big cheese at McLaren. And sort of to see somebody who seems like his boss, it seems like it's his line manager. It was quite a weird and interesting dynamic to see, behind the scenes kind of thing, because I'd never seen this Paul Walsh guy, on any paddock or anything of that nature. And then we get to see him front and center in this documentary. He puts that pressure on Zak Brown to deliver, to perform. And it was quite an eye-opener for me to see that. And I thought, okay, Zak has people he has to report to. He has people to be accountable for. And at the same time, Oscar Piastri, rookie season, and you might think, he's happy to be here. He's just happy to be here. But he's also a Formula One driver now, okay? He is a racer at heart. At the end of the day, he's been racing his whole life. And any driver that turns up into any kind of formula, any kind of sport, motorsport, they are there to win races, okay? It doesn't matter what sport you take part in, you are there to win races. And the challenge really is to see progress, because Paul says this line. He says something like, hope is not a strategy, and it's punchy, it's straight, straight to it. And the thing is with Netflix, right? They've had the hand where whatever somebody says on the documentary, I believe is not scripted, right? So they kind of just press record and just see whatever juice they can get out. They can use that to their advantage. In other films, of course, other documentaries, things can be a little bit more narrated. It can be a little bit more scripted. But in this, one thing I've learned about Drive to Survive over the years is that they give Netflix the footage. They give Netflix what they can what they desire in order of creating narratives, creating stories for episodes and seasons like this. And so there is pressure mounting on Zak Brown because he has to deliver for this Formula One team, because McLaren are nowhere near what they should be. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Lando Norris now also is feeling the pressure on himself by himself in terms of, look, I've been in Formula One for a little bit now, and it's time for me now to start delivering results. Bear this in mind. Lando Norris, I think, joined Formula One in 2019 under McLaren, and he's not won a race with McLaren. 2019, and we're in 2023 in terms of the documentary, and he hasn't won a race in Formula One. At some point, something's got to give. And so the talk everybody knows that Norris is a very good driver, a quality driver. So the talk then becomes about where can we see him going? Where can we see Lando Norris appearing? Surely he can't stay at McLaren if they cannot fulfill his desires. Surely he has to move. Okay, so that's the kind of scenario that we are in right now. So you get a bit of pressure from all sorts of different little elements there. I must say it's interesting to see the growth of Lando Norris, though. The growth of Lando Norris since he's been at McLaren has been quite phenomenal, quite exceptional. And you sort of now see somebody who was a little baby, a little pup with Fernando Alonso in 2019 to now become the lead driver, the main man at McLaren in terms of the drivers. And it's quite interesting to see his development and his growth, because he's somebody who's been very, very patient with McLaren. If there's one thing I'll give him, he's been very, very patient in that McLaren car. He's been somebody who seems to work almost the same hours as the mechanics and the engineers and everybody else, right? All the staff that are there. And he's invested. He's always been invested. This is off the documentary, but he's always been invested in the team. He's always been somebody who wants to be there and sort of find out what is up with the car. How can we make the car better? Let's work as a team. He's been very much like that. And McLaren has been his family, right? It's been his family. So you can understand, over the period of time, he's become the older brother now, the main man almost in the house, right? So it makes sense. The drivers are there for McLaren. The drivers are there. The question is not about the drivers. Even some of the key personnel are there, right? And there are more coming as well. The car, however, has some way to go. Everybody knew it at the start of the season. And it's ironic, before the car even touched track, Zak Brown's having this conversation with Paul Walsh. They are sitting there talking about this car. What is wrong with this car, right? And we find out sort of later on in the episode, behind the scenes, Andreas Stella is already thinking about redesigning this car. He becomes the new team principal because James Key leaves, who's the former team principal, and the car that they've made together has not been great. So Stella's now got the reins, and he can now go ahead and design this car the way he wishes to. And we get to him a little bit later. They cut to Bahrain. I mean, they use the Oscar Piastri says, cut to Bahrain, and literally that's the next move that they make. Like I said, they just gave Netflix a bit of footage there. It must be said, but they do cut to Bahrain, and Bahrain is not great. It's not a great start to the season for McLaren. It's an awful start for McLaren. It was miserable to watch it back. And as a McLaren fan, all the flashbacks, all the trauma that I suffered in 2023 all came back because of how terrible it was. And it makes you look and feel for, you almost sort of feel for the drivers. If you're a fan watching, if you're just a person who's watching the Netflix documentary as a whole, you're looking at the drivers thinking, man, these boys, they're trying to be world champion. They're trying to win races. They're in a car that's a dud. It doesn't make Zak Brown look good. It doesn't make the team look good. The reputation of the team is to be held accountable here. And it's just not delivering. Okay. And so, then Horner gets involved. How long can somebody stay at a team that's not performing? At some point, team principals, they're going to be under pressure. The drivers are going to be looking elsewhere. And so people like Horner, they kind of portray the narrative here, Netflix. They go around with this narrative of the Red Bull team. I don't know what it is. They seem to be sort of having a look at Lando Norris because they see the talent. They know what's there. And so they keep their dabs. They keep their eyes on Lando Norris, right? And throughout the episode, they're teasing that Norris is going to leave McLaren. You get moments where even the way Norris talks, don't get me wrong, like, I don't want to put all the blame to Netflix. I'm just saying, like, the way it's directed and the way, like, this episode was heading for Norris to Red Bull. That's the way it was going, all right, up until this moment here. They moved to the Miami Grand Prix. There's like a media briefing before that. Everyone's talking about Lando Norris's contract. The media briefing takes place with McLaren, and I guess it's like a press conference-y sort of, with your communications with your PR team. You're sort of sitting there, like, you're getting briefed on what you should say to the media, or what you shouldn't say to the media, this, that, and the other. And Norris's behavior, his body language, very subdued, very somebody. Even Oscars was the same. And the truth is, two things: the car is terrible at this moment in time. It's not a good car. Miami was one of the worst races of the season by a country mile. At the same time, Norris has obviously got other thoughts in his mind. He's thinking other things. He wants to maybe go on to another team, maybe having a look, seeing what's greener over there. He's even teasing the idea, will he stay here forever? But it was very, very weird to see how subdued he was, how sort of he wasn't there. Like he wasn't there in that meeting. He wasn't really there because I guess of the frustrations that he's had throughout the entire course of the season. Netflix, what you do so well is creating that tension. You get this idea that Norris is considering his options. You know, Will Buxton as well. The use of Will Buxton in this documentary, by the way, I probably say it every season, but it goes with. I have to mention the point. He does a phenomenal job of. He grabs my attention anyway. He grabs the ear and he says things. He says like one-liners where you're sitting there, you're thinking, okay, we need to pay attention to what he's saying here. He says things that makes you think about, okay, this is what I need to keep in mind as we're watching this documentary. He portrays a phenomenal job in this. Will Buxton is fantastic. He's brilliant at doing this. But yeah, he kind of creates this sort of tension, and it makes you think about this right now. You know, the car's not good, so what now for Lando Norris, right? Let me skip to this scene where, you know, they're having it's a golf day. Zak Brown and Lando Norris is a golf day. And we get to learn a bit of background, by the way, that Zak Brown and Lando Norris have known each other way back. They've known each other for a little while now. And the pursuit of winning a title together is like, it's almost like it creates the story. You've got the nice little narrative there. And the idea is to finish that story with a title being with Zak Brown and a title being with McLaren, his first and only Formula One team thus far, right? And, you know, even in the pep talk that they're having during the golfing, you know, Lando Norris is saying like, look, we're McLaren, right? So we should be in the top tier. Like, and Zak's very much like, you know, look, I know this is rubbish. I know that we're not doing well. I know that we should be better than where we are right now. But, you know, and Norris is saying exactly like we're McLaren, we should be top tier. We should be fighting in that top four with the top four teams at the moment in Formula One, right? With your Mercedes, your Red Bulls, your Ferraris, and the Aston Martin, who kind of come out of nowhere. This is the kind of team that we should be up against. We get to the Miami Grand Prix, it's an uphill battle. McLaren are getting slapped all over the place. Williams are overtaking them. The Alfa Romeos are overtaking them, okay? Like they didn't, you know, and Netflix didn't really portray this much, but to get overtaken by these two teams, McLaren were dead awful. McLaren were awful in the start of 2023, and maybe they could have horned in that a little bit with the Netflix with the documentary. I love the documentary, by the way, but they could have probably, you know, really squeezed that lemon there, you know, squeeze the juice, if you will, in terms of how bad it is to be overtaken, how bad the Miami Grand Prix was in general. Okay, it's one that gives us trauma. Horner kind of gives you this portrayal of like, you know, Horner, by the way, is the gift that keeps on giving for these Netflix guys, right? And who knows what's going to happen with his situation and in his position at this moment in time. I'm already looking forward to Drive to Survive for next season, right? With everything that's going on with him. But you get this idea that, you know, the way Horner talks, he sort of, it's like a dig to Zak Brown. You know, Zak Brown talks a big game, he says, you know, he talks a big game, but if you do not deliver, then, you know, you're going to be shown up type of thing. And it's almost like, okay, you know, there's a bit of spice between Zak Brown and Christian Horner, which I don't mind. You know, you have a bit of rivalry. It's nothing personal. I think it's very much motorsport related. Everyone's trying to be the best. And I think in the back of my mind, I think, you know, especially in the back of his mind, Horner's mind, he wants Lando Norris in that Red Bull one day. You know, now, would you like to have Norris and Verstappen in a Red Bull? Because I'm not, you know, not to discredit Sergio Perez, I can't imagine them swapping a Verstappen for Lando Norris, with all due respect. But yeah, it's quite interesting. You know, you get the team principles. Even Toto Wolff gets in the mix. You know, if you don't deliver in Formula One, if you don't deliver, your job will be on the line, and all that kind of spiel. And it just sort of, and he kind of gives the portrayal here, Toto Wolff, of, you know, you got to remember these drivers have been driving since they were 5. They've been wanting to be winners from day dot, right? So we can't muck around with their F1 careers. They've got to think about their career. And Lando Norris talks about this idea of like, look, there's that loyalty in Formula One that I want to finish the story with McLaren, you know, and then Claire Williams and Danica Patrick, they're all in that mix of that there's a little bit there, there's a little moment in that episode where they're all kind of just giving their opinion. You want to be loyal, but you want to win the races. You want to get to the best team. You want to do what's best for your career. And it's kind of going back and forth. And it's almost like in a whirlwind. You know, you're sort of thinking of what is in Norris's head. Like, where on earth is he, you know? And it's quite fascinating of what a driver would go through during a season. You know, you don't really think about this when you're watching it week in, week out, or you're watching race to race. You're not really thinking about what's Lando Norris thinking about his contract at this moment in time. Even though he's at a Grand Prix weekend, he's on duty to drive for his team. You know, there's these other things that come into play. So yeah, and then, you know, one thing Netflix does well, which I really do love about them, they cut to a scene with like Lando Norris and George Russell. We just get them in a private jet. You know, what's going on over there? Why are they in a private jet? But again, little nuances, little bit of juice, little bit of energy, you know, a bit of behind the scenes stuff. George Russell saying, you know, in his Williams contract, he was not allowed to drink on weekends, on the race weekends, I assume he meant. And then he said, but I knew people that did. I saw it and they paid me off not to tell. You know, just stuff like that where you just think, wow, this is like good information here, you know. This is great stuff. And they were talking obviously about the Miami Grand Prix, which of course wasn't quite great, right? Danica Patrick, though, there's a bit here, and Netflix, you do this very well. They are throwing us in this direction of Lando Norris thinking about his options and considering to leave McLaren. You know, she portrays the suspense very, very well. And she says, look, you want to be at McLaren, you want to keep that loyalty, but then, you know, when the door comes knocking, when the right thing comes knocking on the door, you've got to go. And then it cuts. Next scene, you think, oh my God, is Norris about to, is he about to leave McLaren? Is he about to go ahead? Now, I'm speaking from like the viewer who doesn't watch Formula One. They're just watching a Netflix series, right? All on its own. And you're led to believe that Norris is gone. He's out of here. He's moving to Red Bull, or he's moving to another team. He's leaving McLaren. But we keep getting teased with it, and then they don't really follow on from that in the next scene. The next scene just cuts to something different. Brilliant the way it's portrayed. But Norris as well talks about, look, there's a story here with McLaren. I want to do this with McLaren. You know, if in the ideal world, this is where I want to finish this story. This is where I want to create a story and finish it with McLaren, right? And so you think, oh, look at that. He's got the desire for it. McLaren just needs to deliver that car. You know what I mean? He just needs to deliver that car. Even sponsors are having a conversation with Zak Brown. They're having a conversation with Zak Brown. They're sitting him down and saying, look, talk to me. What's going on here? We put big money on you guys. You know, you're our biggest sponsor. I think this is Onyx or OKX or whatever. I can't remember who they're called. But, you know, they're having a conversation. They're having meetings with Zak Brown. You're thinking, Jesus, what's going on here? You know, the pressure is coming from all bounds, all corners. The title is correct. You know, Netflix, they're not missing with these titles, by the way. They're hitting them hard. You know, McLaren's under pressure. Norris is under pressure. Zak Brown is under pressure, you know, and it's coming from all different corners. You know, and they're getting pressure from everywhere, from other teams in Formula One, from the sponsors, from their own internal people as well. Pressure is left, right, and center. And yeah, you know, you almost think, you know, what's the gain? You know, the sponsors are sort of asking, what do we do here? And Will Buxton kind of gives you that kind of full circle, the whole circle of it all. Like, the sponsors want to know if they can keep Norris. Because the question now becomes, forget now even winning races, can we keep Norris in this McLaren seat? Is it worth, you know, their time even being there if Norris is not going to be there? And all of a sudden you just think, wow, Norris has become this big figurehead all of a sudden in Formula One. And when you've watched a driver for all the years, I've watched Norris his whole Formula One career, and you sort of see like the growth, and you think, wow, this guy's come from almost nothing to be, you know, now amongst the top, amongst the elite. It's incredible to see. It's absolutely incredible to see. And then we get a piece of Andrea Stella. This is what I want to talk about. They talk to Andrea Stella. Andrea Stella obviously gives the lowdown of, we're not quite told that they're going to create a new car, right? Or like redesign the car or create some new things in the car. But we just cut to this. It was obvious they needed to change things, so maybe that's why they didn't mention it, because of how bad the season was. But Stella's like, look, we decided to, you know, we're going to do some new things here, but, you know, it's going to be actually bigger than we thought, you know. They were talking about like the floor of the car and things of that nature. So Andrea Stella and the team are working to the bone, and the aim is to get 2 cars ready for Silverstone. And, you know, can they get the cars ready? Can they do it where both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris can get these upgrades and be like, okay, here we go. Now, in real life, the Austrian Grand Prix, I think Lando Norris got the new car already. And then they were working on the new car with Oscar Piastri. And I thought that was kind of weird that they didn't actually add a little bit of that in there, giving a little bit of wholesome context. But, you know, footage is footage, time is time. So, you know, so they're redesigning the car. And, you know, it's so interesting to see that Zak Brown is in this vulnerable position because he has this conversation with Paul Walsh, and Paul's like, look, let's cut to the chase here. Where are we? You know, and sort of like where we're going to go from here type of thing. And it was really poignant when I saw that, because I thought, I'm seeing Zak here, like really like has a manager, you know, it's real. Whereas I see Zak Brown as the man, as the figurehead, as the boss. But yeah, he has a manager, and he's being asked questions like, okay, cool. Where are we? Where's this team? Where are we at? You know, are you going to deliver? Are you going to show me that we are here to be for real? Like, are we going to be serious? Because what if the upgrades don't work? What if we get this redesign and it falls to pieces? And Zak Brown, I love the way he kind of responds, because many people can sort of feel that pressure from a boss and then feel a type of way about that boss, and then feel like, oh, this boss doesn't like me, or he's not nice, or he or she's not nice. And the way Zak's like, listen, this is not lost with me. You know, I understand what's at stake here, and I understood very well. I understand very well what would happen if this doesn't go well. But he's banking on it. He believes in his team. And what you won't know through this documentary is that Zak Brown put all these pieces in terms of personnel, people, all in place. He's been getting the sponsors. He's been working his finger to the bone, getting these sponsors. He's been working his finger to the bone to get the right personnel in the team. So he's leaving the team, the technical team, to deliver the performance in the car. He's left it with them. He's picked the people and let them go ahead and do that job. He's then, you know, now he's tasked with, listen, to be blunt, as Paul would say it, we need to deliver. And Zak says, understood, loud and clear, you know? And I love that. I just love that. I don't know what it is. I just love the way that he just takes it on, you know what I mean? Like, there's no arguing, there's no complaining, there's no moaning, there's no conversation here, no negotiation. He gets on with the job. Somebody tells you got to go ahead and do this. It's not impossible for you to do. And he goes ahead and he does it. And I like the relationship, because it's like, it's one of those where you think, you know what? It's a relationship where it's quite business heavy. You know, it seems like Zak reports into Paul, but there's sort of a gentleman relationship there that I really do admire. That I was like, oh, I want to, you know, I love this. I love this kind of action. I want to see a lot more of this. We get to Silverstone anyway, and guys, the upgrades work. They friggin' work, and it's the best moment I tell you of last season. As a McLaren fan watching Silverstone, it's one of those feelings that was in the feels. We get a little glimpses of Mercedes, you know, who are struggling, and they're saying, you know, P7 and whatever else, you know, P7 in qualifying behind the McLarens. By the way, Lando Norris P2. Now, listen, I'm not even giving it justice. Lando Norris P2, Oscar Piastri P3 in qualifying. McLaren have a fast frigging car. Right? From being in P17, not finishing races, no reliability. Because even Stella says, look, we got this new design, right? But we got to see what it looks like. We got to see how close to the nail we can get there. And we have to also talk about the reliability issue, right? Now, it's a bit of everything. And so basically, you know, this is what it is. Let's see what happens. Guys, they qualify P2 and 3 at Silverstone at the British Grand Prix. In the race as well, Norris fighting with this car in terms of like being able to defend off Lewis Hamilton of all people. There's a moment where there's a safety car out as well. At the start of the race, he overtakes Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, the man who is the legend at the moment in Formula One, the man who's the fastest man on the planet right now, right? And Lando Norris is overtaking him at the jump. You know, he gets overtaken eventually because the Red Bull is simply superior at the end of the day. But hey, you know, you're second place in a McLaren when you were lying in 17th for most of the season, right? You'll take that any day of the week. They go leaps and bounds. And I feel like, I don't know if this is a Netflix issue. I'm not too sure. But like, there isn't enough like, oh my God, what a moment this is. Do you know what I mean? Like, there wasn't enough of that. And I feel like they could have done a little bit more there. But nonetheless, I was all in the fields. Lando Norris in the race finishes P2, Oscar Piastri P4, and Lando Norris defending against Lewis Hamilton. You know, Lewis Hamilton at the restart of like a safety car situation. Hamilton's right behind Lando Norris. Norris is like, yeah, brilliant. I know that Hamilton's behind me. And he even says, listen, if there's one guy you do not want at the back, you know, behind you, right, at a race restart, it's Lewis Hamilton. You know, we're talking about 7-time Formula One world champion, albeit in the Mercedes he's in right now. That's terrible. But he's still Lewis Hamilton. And Norris does everything he can to fight it off. Hamilton says things like, the McLarens are so fast on the straight. The McLarens is a rocket ship. It just goes to show the testament of how good this McLaren was. And I love the way that Netflix did put this piece together. The fortunes turned round, man, and there's absolute jubilant scenes. Zak, if you're not happy for Zak Brown, then I don't know. What's wrong with you? You got to be happy for Zak Brown. The episode ends in jubilation. McLaren seem to have turned it around, especially at Silverstone, where they got the upgrades. The car is fast again, and glorious scenes, right? Scenes of glorious emotion. Let me know your thoughts on that episode 3, Under Pressure, the McLaren episode, basically. Let me know what your thoughts were on that episode when you watched it. Let me know what you think I missed out on. Let me know what you think about the comments I've had, the review I've had for this episode. It's been brilliant. We're going on to episode 4. So until next time, see you then. Peace.